The Cleveland Browns, 2-1, are going on the road to face the 1-2 Minnesota Vikings. The Cleveland Browns are a 2-point favorite in this game. This game is going to be played on CBS with a 1 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff. Cleveland crushed Chicago last week, 26-6. They had 9 sacks on rookie quarterback Justin Fields, who was making his NFL debut, and that defense put on a show. They put a shellacking on Chicago. Well, you're facing a better opponent this week than what you were last week. So I'm not expecting this Browns defense to replicate the performance that they had last week against a lackluster offensive line. But you also have a Minnesota offense right now that is really peaking and is led by quarterback Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins is quietly having a great season. Haven't really seen nobody in the national media talking about it. You know, everybody's been talking about Matthew Stafford and Kyler Murray, but nobody's been talking about Kirk Cousins. And if we're being real, you know, the Minnesota Vikings easily could be 3-0, but they've had some things that haven't really went their way. You had a fumble, which ended up leading to them losing one game. You had a missed field goal in another game. So the reason why Minnesota is 1-2 isn't because of Kirk Cousins. That's just a popular narrative that a lot of people, for some reason, have. They like to blame Kirk Cousins for the Minnesota Vikings' shortcomings. And although Kirk Cousins does have some games when he doesn't play up to par, most of the time Kirk Cousins is pretty good. So I hope that Kirk Cousins has a good game against Cleveland, because this is going to be a game that a lot of people are going to have their eyes on. And I really don't feel like enough people are giving Kirk Cousins the credit he deserves. Like, Kirk Cousins isn't a bad quarterback. I don't know why people will continue to say that. But when you look at Kirk Cousins so far this season, 918 passing yards, 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, completing 73% of his passes. He has done everything that Minnesota has asked him to do and more. And like I said, if it wasn't for a couple of plays, the Minnesota Vikings could easily be 3-0. So you look at Cleveland right now. Cleveland is really rolling on offense, even though they have had some injuries at wide receiver. Jarvis Landry is injured, but you still do have Donovan Peoples-Jones, Odell returned, and I think that the wide receivers for Cleveland and Peoples-Jones and Odell Beckham Jr. could be in for a big game against this Minnesota Vikings defense that is allowing too many big plays. They're pretty much second to last in the NFL in yards per play. They're allowing 6.8 yards per play. They're also second to last in yards per pass. They're allowing 9 yards per pass attempt, and they're 28th in rushing yards per attempt. They're allowing 4.8 yards per rush. So this is a Minnesota Vikings defense that still has a lot of troubles that they had last year when it comes to how they match up against allowing big plays. So I'm looking at Mike Zimmer. He's facing his former coordinator and Kevin Stefanski, and I want to see what new wrinkles are both of these guys going to bring to the table, because Mike Zimmer knows Kevin Stefanski. He knows what Kevin Stefanski wants to do. He knows that Kevin Stefanski wants to get that run game going, and he wants to set up play action. And Mike Zimmer knows that his defense is probably going to get gashed if they allow Cleveland to set up the run game, because once that run game gets going and you can get that play action pass game going, that's pretty much wraps if you ask me, because you look at how many big plays this Minnesota Vikings defense has surrendered over the last couple of weeks. It's been a lot. So for Mike Zimmer, he's probably going to throw a lot of exotic looks at Baker Mayfield. He's probably going to throw a lot of exotic blitzes at Baker Mayfield, try to get pressure on him. Cleveland does have a really good offensive line, one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, but Minnesota has also been pretty good at getting pressure on the QB this year. So that's going to be a really intriguing matchup to watch. And if you're Kevin Stefanski, okay, how are you going to game plan for the looks that Mike Zimmer is going to give you? So both of these guys pretty much have a pretty good grasp on what the other is going to try to do. So I'm pretty sure they're going to end up going into their bag of trips and trying to throw some new wrinkles out there, something that nobody has ever seen before. So I think that's going to be a really exciting matchup that I'm interested in seeing. A lot of people are always focused on what goes on the field, but you got to remember, football is not just a game of trying to knock the opposing team's head off. It's also a strategy game. It's also kind of like playing chess. It's all about maneuvering your players in the proper places to have success, or putting them in the right situations to have success. And that's why like matchups like this that are going to be dictated on terms of what happens on the sidelines between Mike Zimmer, who's known as a defensive guru, versus Kevin Stefanski, who's known as an offensive-minded coach. That's always an intriguing matchup to watch. Now, for Cleveland, they're 5th in the NFL in yards per play. So I think that Cleveland definitely has a mismatch if they're able to get their run game established going against that Minnesota Vikings secondary, because I told a lot of people in the preseason that Minnesota secondary didn't look all that great. And a lot of people like, oh, JT, it's just preseason. Nobody's really playing for in the preseason. I was like, okay, you can say that, but, isn't that a starter? Isn't Cameron Dantzler a starter? And a lot of people told me, don't worry about it. Well, those same problems are still happening. So I look at Cleveland, man. I think Baker Mayfield can have a career day. Now, Dalvin Cook, don't know if he's going to play in this game. But to be quite frankly with you, I don't really think it matters if he plays or doesn't play, because Alexander Mattison had a really good performance last week against Seattle. And I've been trying to tell people that Alexander Mattison could be a starter on a handful of NFL teams. He basically is like a discount version of Dalvin Cook in terms of what he's able to do. So for Minnesota, their wide receivers has also had a lot of success. You look at Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen is racking up a lot of touchdowns. So this is going to be a really intriguing matchup to watch for a Browns defense that so far looks like they have come on over the past couple of weeks. Now, I want to see how they're going to game plan for Myles Garrett, because I think one of their offensive tackles is a backup who's supposed to be starting, because Christian Darrisaw, I believe, is still injured. I don't know if he's going to play in this game. So if he doesn't play in this game, then Myles Garrett is going to be matched up against a backup. So what are the game plans going to be for trying to maintain and handle Myles Garrett? Are you going to try to double team him? Are you going to try to chip him with a tight end or a running back? Don't really know, but you can't allow Myles Garrett to dictate the outcome of this game, because last week, Chicago allowed that to happen, and that was also another reason why they lost that game. Not just because of the bad play calling, but also because they didn't really have a proper game plan for trying to stop Myles Garrett, because he tortured Jason Peters. God help Jason Peters, man. But the team I'm going to take to win this game, I'm going to take Minnesota. And that's probably going to be a surprise to a lot of people, but I think that Minnesota is one of those teams that is better than what their record may indicate, because a lot of people always feel like you're just as good as what your record indicates. That's not always the case, because if you go back, like I said earlier, and watch that week 1 game that they had when they lost to Cincinnati, and you look at the games that they lost, like they've all came down to, one play really. And those are games that could have easily went in Minnesota's favor if the ball would have bounced in their favor or in their direction. So Minnesota, to me, is one of the better teams in the NFL right now. And I think they're going to end up pulling off the upset against Cleveland. Give me Minnesota to win 35-31. I think this is going to be a high-scoring matchup. I think that Cleveland's offense is definitely going to be able to rack up a lot of yardage on this Minnesota Vikings secondary, because they're not good at, minimizing big plays. So I think we're going to see Odell and Donovan Peoples-Jones go off. But at the end of the day, though, I think that Minnesota's offense, if they have the ball in their hands last, I think they're going to be able to pull it off. So give me Minnesota.